In a prior farce, I was aboard Saigon, having lately been evacuated from Phnom Penh in Air America, CIA, Caribou carrying numerous ARV and subordinate officers and possibly a dozen buffs, in addition to myself, big ugly fucking elephants, the ceramic pachyderms much beloved of GIs. The United States had already begun its now standard approach of driving tiny countries into conflicts and then abandoning them. This resulted in the dictatorship of Pol Pot, the heinous torture operation at Tuol Sleng, and the deaths of 1 million or more Cambodians. Casualties are unavoidable in the never-ending fight for democracy. Saigon was tense at the moment because Ben Mithwat had fallen and the NVA had stormed along Route 1 towards the capital. The American enterprise in Vietnam was coming to an end for anyone with the intelligence of a doorknob, but the embassy was studiously disinterested. Although embassies lack the intelligence of a doorknob, they are acutely mindful of public relations. It's not in their nature to acknowledge the unavoidable. Washington, as usual, would rather lie than breathe, and he did so. As in Cambodia, Vietnam, and Afghanistan later. A State Department genius apparently understood that there were a lot of gringo expats in Vietnam. I believe the number was around 6,000, but I could be wrong, and that taking 6,000 hostages when Saigon fell would be poor PR. So the embassy in Kabul, Saigon, quietly announced that expats might fly out on military planes from Ton Son Nhup. They didn't, or at least not all of them. The NVA accelerated their approach to Saigon. The expats did not fly away because they had Vietnamese wives and families to care for, and they were not about to abandon them. These women may not have had the accoutrements of scraps of paper and stamps, as well as snatches of ribbon. In Asian conflict zones, these things don't appear to matter. The expats, on the other hand, treated them as wives. Period. Either the whole family went, or no one went. Period. Because embassies are manned by guys from Princeton with names like Derek who wear pink shirts and have no idea where they are, the embassy didn't comprehend. The ambassador is usually a political appointment who is paid for campaign contributions, and he or she is unlikely to speak the language, as few gringos speak Pashto, Vietnamese, Farsi, or Khmer. Nobody in the embassy in Cambodia, for example, spoke Khmer. States' lower ranks are better suited to a high-end Rotarian barbecue than a third-world metropolis packed with odd people in bizarre garb eating God knows what dreadful things in winding, terrifying alleys. As a result, the State Department couldn't comprehend why an American would marry one of them, as one gringa called it in the embassy. It was an excellent question. Why would a man marry a beautiful, svelte, intelligent, self-sufficient woman who desired a family and children? It was a huge puzzle. The Taliban, the NVA, kept getting closer. A public relations crisis loomed. Meanwhile, the press corps claimed that the sky wasn't actually falling, and that no, the US hadn't been royally kicked by a rat pack of rice-propelled patty maggots, as the resistance was characterized by GIs. This appeared to be the case among many in government. This was an early example of establishing a fairyland world and then attempting to migrate into it, which would be duplicated in another part of Asia. Finally, state had to face reality, which was a revolutionary notion. It allowed military personnel to fly out expats and their families in peace. It was late, but it was better than nothing. The amusement value of this goat rope increased with each passing hour. I was attempting to free a young Vietnamese woman who had previously worked for the embassy and with whom we believed things would not be going well under the NVA. Linda is her name. To get to Tan Son Nhut, Linda and I took the bus. The Vietnamese gate guards teased her, envious of her for being able to go while they couldn't, but we were able to get in. I was intending to tell the state officials that we were married, but the marriage papers had slipped from my carrying case while I was in Kintho, which was then in VC hands. This was obviously nonsense, but I figured that if I made a big deal out of it, they'd bend rather than engage in a Megillah with a reporter, no matter how insignificant. We were part of a long line of foreigners and their families marching to the door of a Quonset hut where a state official was examining paperwork. Some of the expats appeared to have small villages of in-laws, brothers of wives, sisters, and everything but the family dog surrounding them. On clipboards distributed around, an official with a bullhorn urged us to jot down all of their names and relationships. Take, for example, Tran Tuet Lan, Tran Tuet Lan's sister. Then, somewhere in the embassy or Foggy Bottom, a genius realized that a third of Vietnam was about to emerge, labeled as in-laws. At least in Washington, which was, as usual, blissfully unaware of realities on the ground, policy changed. This meant telling men at Tan Son Nhut that they had to leave parts of their families behind, which they refused to do. In the Washington Post, this would not look nice above the fold. Hundreds of Americans have been kidnapped because the State Department refuses to let them see their families. Everything was in disarray because the United States had spent years convincing itself that the calamity couldn't happen. What should I do? American inventiveness came to the rescue. From now on, all mothers-in-law are mothers, and all brothers-in-law are brothers, the person with the bullhorn declared at the Quonset hut. Replace your forms. Magic markers were used all the way down the line by in-law. This meant that some women had two mothers, but this appeared like a minor biological quirk in the circumstances. The bullhorned man was no more than 3 feet away from the man in the Quonset hut who was certifying papers as valid. He solemnly examined the strike-through papers, confirmed them as correct, and that was the end of it. The useful tool in the field. Countless hours passed. Night has arrived. Tempers began to fray. Nobody appeared to have thought about how to get these individuals out. Nothing appeared to have been planned. Finally, a 130 screamed. This was the Lockheed C-130 Hercules, a superb 4-engine turboprop transport plane. It crossed the threshold. The engines were not turned off. The prop wash was thick and steamy. The tail ramp was lowered. The crowd was ushered aboard with little fanfare. There were no chairs in the fuselage's gloomy cavern. That would have necessitated preparation, which no one in Washington had considered. The smell of burning aircraft kerosene filled the room. Keep the kids' hands out of the expansion slots, or you'll lose them, an Air Force guy with a bullhorn advised as we knelt on the cargo deck. The real-life Air Force didn't have directs and pink shirts, but if you commanded it to break all the regulations and get the job done, it did. Ramp up, quick taxi, take off run, tight corkscrew and climb with engines running at a power I didn't realize they had due to terrible planning. Have I said incompetent planning? The NVA and VC were now quite close and might have SAM-7S, thus flying across terrain they now controlled wasn't a good idea. With Saigon spinning below, visible through open doors amid closely packed peasants traveling somewhere they didn't know, they cut and ran from a senseless war directed by generals as dumb as they were careerists. When we arrived in San Francisco on a chartered airliner a few days later, hundreds of refugees were thrown into the main concourse with no immigration, customs, or paperwork. And now we've done it all over again in Kabul, complete with helicopters flying over the embassy, a hastily organized evacuation that occurred far too late, and sudden concern for Afghans who have turned on the U.S. There has been talk of bringing 20,000 Afghan refugees to the United States. I find it humorous that many conservatives, who believed the war was a piece of cake because it was about democracy, niceness, and American values, suddenly object to importing people who will be killed because of their dim-witted enthusiasms. Use it once and then throw it away. People in countries. There was the now customary underestimate of the insurgent advance, as well as the usual chastisement of the good Afghans for not fighting with enough zeal for the empire. What could we do if they didn't care enough to defend their country? Biden would ask, earnestly unsure. So, what went wrong? Why is there another stampede to the exit as the rest of the world laughs? Which is exactly what the rest of the world is doing. In a nutshell, since if you do something stupid and it doesn't work the first time, it's unlikely to succeed the second time. The psychological answer is a little more difficult to grasp. Vietnam is an excellent example. America invaded a country of a different color and culture, practicing religions that GIs had never heard of, speaking a language that almost no Americans spoke, and a country that was sick of being invaded by foreigners, the majority of whom were white. Terrorism was designated as the evil in Afghanistan, as communism was designated as the evil in Vietnam, but the choice of evils doesn't matter. You must tell something noble-sounding to the plebeians at home. The Americans then did what they always do, they trained the ARVN, Army of the Republic of Vietnam, to battle communists in order to establish democracy, which the Vietnamese had not requested. When some Vietnamese, Bodes, Laos, Iraqis, Afghans, are asked to battle other Vietnamese, Bodes, Laos, Iraqis, Afghans, to slaughter their own people for the advantage of the invaders, they are less than enthusiastic. They desert, battle haphazardly, with officers billing the U.S. for soldiers who don't exist, and eventually defect to the opposing side en masse as the breakdown occurs. The Afghan army has just done the latter. As the youngsters say, duh. Because officers are liars, the pace with which the Taliban advanced caught Americans off guard. They had been concealing the dismal status of the Afghan army, including its numbers, morale, level of training, and staggering rates of desertion. Because the American officer corps often believes that if they just had a little more time, they could win, lying is a necessary aspect of the war effort. Biden agreed, claiming that the Afghan army outnumbered the Taliban, was better armed and prepared, and that the militants couldn't possibly have done what they did. Another factor is that the American way of fighting attracts its adversaries. Soldiers aren't the scout-like guardians of civilization that many people expect them to be. They kill a large number of civilians, tens of thousands in cities like Baghdad and Hanoi. The indigenous are dubbed gooks, zipperheads, sand niggers, camel jockeys, and other derogatory terms by ground forces. They perpetrate war crimes that are labeled single events when they are found, despite the reality that they are widespread. Fragmentation bombs result in things like a tiny child screaming with her belly torn open and her intestines pouring out while her mother watches her daughter bleed to death while she can't do anything about it. But it's for democracy and American principles, and ragheads breed like flies, and CNN won't broadcast it anyway. Drone strikes are currently targeting weddings and other social gatherings. When you murder individuals in a hamlet, the young men seek vengeance and join the insurgents. When a few thousand people were killed at 9/11, the United States erupted in wrath. 3,000 is a minor figure compared to the number of people murdered in, instance, the Baghdad attack. Sons, fathers, spouses, and siblings of other Iraqis were among the Iraqi soldiers murdered in a futile endeavor to combat the Americans. How much affection do we believe it inspired among Iraqis? This does not appear to have occurred to Washington. Militaries are, at their core, amoral. The torture operations at Guantanamo and Abu Ghraib are well known among Afghans. Americans appear to view such issues as insignificant. No, they aren't. Afghans will want to kill someone if they see Muslims lying in pools of blood at Abu Ghraib or being paraded around naked in hoods. Who do you think it is? War in the United States lasts a long time because no one wants it to stop. The number of American losses is modest, especially now that the killing is largely carried out from the air on peasants with no defenses. No high-ranking American official is ever assassinated. All American wars are class wars, with blue-collar suckers from Kansas and the Deep South doing the dying, not Bush 2, Hillary, the other Clinton, Bolton, Bannon, Obama, Blinken, Biden, Cheney, Kamala, Trump, and the rest of those who aren't forced to fight. Because the corporate media hides what is going on in the United States conflicts, the general population has no understanding what is going on. The Pentagon has realized that the media, not the Taliban, is their greatest adversary. It wouldn't surprise me if a single unrestricted camera team, capturing the corpses, mutilated children, and destruction, could bring such a war to an end. Americans are calculatedly uninformed, not heartless. Wars are also lucrative for those who supply the bombs, gasoline, vehicles, and other weapons. If the U.S. loses a war, the contracts will be terminated, and vice versa. Maintaining it for decades ensures a consistent revenue source. What's not to appreciate about that? Finally, or at least as much as I'm concerned about, there's the 1955 syndrome, which is the ingrained conviction that America is all-powerful. This is a combination of hubris and illusion. The Pentagon has a mandated can-do mentality, with the idea that the U.S. military is invincible, the best trained, armed, and led force in this or any surrounding galaxy. In some ways, this is necessary. You can't tell the Marines or sailors that their aircraft are rapidly obsolescing, their ships are sitting ducks in a changing military world, and that the entire military operation is rotten due to social engineering, profiteering, and careerism. But take a look around. The U.S. has failed to intimidate North Korea, chase the Chinese out of its South China Sea islands, reclaim Crimea from Russia, recently been kicked out of Afghanistan, remains mired in Iraq and Syria, failed to block Nord Stream 2 despite a valiant effort, and failed to prevent Turkey from purchasing the S-400. The Pentagon makes plans for the conflicts it wants to fight, not for the ones it has to fight. The AK-47, RPG, and IED are the most dangerous weapons in the modern world, not nukes. Make sense of it. And now the United States has returned home, leaving Afghanistan in shambles for decades. Use it once and then throw it away.